A young woman walked into a palace and never walked out the same. Her name was Wu Zetian. Most people will tell you she was a monster. They say she killed her own child. They say she destroyed anyone who stood in her way. They say fear followed her like a shadow that never left. And maybe some of that is true. But here's the part that always bothered me. The people who wrote her story were the same people she replaced. Men who lost power. Men who lost control. Men who suddenly had to bow to a woman. So tell me this, if your enemy wrote your story, what would they say about you? She didn't just become powerful. She became something no woman was supposed to be. An emperor, not a queen beside a king, not a voice behind a curtain. The throne was hers. That kind of power doesn't come quietly. It leaves marks on others and on history itself. So, what do we do with someone like her? Was she cruel or just unwilling to be weak? Was she dangerous or simply inconvenient? I think the truth is harder than either answer, because sometimes the most feared person in history is the one who refused to play by its rules. And history never forgives that. She was gone, and suddenly, everyone had something to say. Wu Zetian was no longer in the room, no longer on the throne, no longer able to answer back. That's when the stories began to harden. Men sat in quiet halls, brushes in hand, ink on silk, and they started to write her into history. I think that's where things get complicated, because these weren't just historians. They were survivors, former officials, men who had lived under her rule or lost their place because of it. And now they had the last word. So what did they remember? Not the roads that stayed open, not the exams that gave common men a chance, not the stability after chaos. They remembered fear. Or maybe they chose to. They wrote about a woman who broke the natural order, a woman who stepped where she was never meant to stand. In their world, power had a shape, and it was never hers. So they gave her a different shape. A monster, a warning, a lesson. I've always wondered how much of history is memory and how much is revenge. Because think about it. If you spent your whole life believing the world worked one way, and then someone proved you wrong, would you admire them? Or would you rewrite them? They didn't just record what she did, they judged why she did it. Every decision became suspicion. Every victory, something darker. And over time, those stories became truth. Or at least, something that felt like truth. That's the dangerous part. Not the rumors themselves, but how long they last. Because once a story is written, it doesn't just describe a person. It decides them. So when we hear her name now, what are we really hearing? A woman who ruled too hard? Or a story told too well? I don't think the answer is simple. But I do think this matters. Because if her legacy was written by enemies, then we're not just listening to history. We're listening to a verdict. And maybe it's one that was decided long before we ever heard her name. She stood in a quiet room with a child who would never grow up. Wu Zetian was still young then, not an emperor, not even the most powerful woman in the palace. Just a mother. And in that moment, everything changed. The child was gone. No clear witness, no certain truth. But there was a story. They said she did it herself. They said she took a life to take a throne. And once that story was written, it never left her. I'll be honest, that accusation is hard to ignore. Because it doesn't just question power. It questions something deeper. What kind of person would do that? But here's where it gets uncomfortable. The only people who told that story were the ones who came after. The ones who already believed she was dangerous. The ones who needed her to be. So the story fit. Too well. And once it fit, it stayed. Then came the others. Rivals removed, officials accused, names erased from court records. Some disappeared quietly. Some were remembered as warnings. And again, the stories followed the same pattern. She was ruthless. She trusted no one. She ruled through fear. Maybe she did. But I keep coming back to this. Power at that level is never clean. Not for men, not for women. The difference is, men are often called strong. Women are called something else. So what are we really looking at here? A woman who crossed a line? Or a line that was never meant to be crossed by her? Because once you believe she is capable of the worst, every action starts to look like proof. Every silence becomes guilt. Every success, something darker underneath. That's how stories work. They don't just tell you what happened. They tell you what to believe about it. So when we hear about the child, the rivals, the fear, are we hearing facts? Or are we hearing a story that was too powerful to ever be questioned? I don't have a clean answer. But I do know this. The more certain a story sounds, the more carefully we should listen. She sat on the throne and did something no one expected. Wu Zetian didn't just remove enemies. She started choosing different people. Not the old families, not the powerful names everyone recognized. Strangers, young men from distant provinces, scholars no one had heard of, people who had never stood inside a palace before. And suddenly, they were standing right next to her. I think that's when the ground really started to shift. Because power wasn't just changing hands, it was changing rules. There was a farmer's son who spent years studying by candlelight. No connections, no protection. Before her, he would never have been seen. Under her, he passed the imperial exams. He walked into the court. He spoke, and people had to listen. That kind of change feels small until you realize what it breaks. Old families lost their grip. old alliances stopped working, and the people who had always been safe suddenly weren't. Now here's the question. Is that justice or is that disruption? Because it depends on where you're standing. If you were on the outside, this looked like opportunity. If you were already inside, this looked like danger. And maybe both are true. She wasn't soft. She wasn't trying to be liked. She was building something that worked for her. And I'll say this. It takes a certain kind of mind to see a system and decide it doesn't deserve to stay the same. But it also takes a certain kind of cost. Because every new door she opened closed one for someone else. And those people remembered. They always do. So when history calls her ruthless, I wonder what they're really reacting to. Her methods? Or the fact that she changed who mattered? Because there's a difference between controlling power and redefining who gets to have it. She did both. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because it's easier to accept a harsh ruler than one who rewrites the rules beneath you. So let me ask you this. When someone changes the system and you lose your place in it, do you call them a reformer? Or do you call them dangerous? She walked through the palace, and no one spoke. Wu Zetian didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to explain herself. People already understood, because by then, the rules had changed again. The same system she opened, she now controlled completely. And control comes with a different kind of silence. There was a man once, a mid-level official, careful, loyal, invisible. He said the wrong thing. Maybe not even wrong, just unwelcome. The next day, he was gone. No trial, no public scene, just absence. And after that, no one needed to be told anything. I think that's how fear really works. Not loud, not chaotic. Quiet, predictable. It teaches people without speaking to them. Now, here's the uncomfortable part. This wasn't unusual. Male rulers did the same before her, after her. Power protects itself. That's the rule, almost everywhere. But when she did it, it felt different. Or maybe it was seen differently. Because she wasn't supposed to be there. A woman at the very top. No precedent. No forgiveness. So every decision carried more weight. Every punishment felt more personal. And every act of control became proof of something darker. But let's slow down for a second. What would survival look like in her position? Surrounded by people who didn't accept you, watched by those waiting for you to fail. One mistake, and everything collapses. Would you trust easily? Would you show weakness? Or would you build a system where no one could reach you? I don't think she ruled through fear alone. I think she understood it, used it, managed it, like a tool. And that's what makes this complicated. Because fear can protect power, but it also isolates it. The higher she rose, the fewer people she could trust. until eventually there was no one left at all. So when history calls her ruthless, I hear something else underneath. Not just cruelty, but calculation. Not just dominance, but survival. And maybe that's the hardest question of all. When power demands survival, how much of yourself are you willing to lose? She grew old in a palace that had gone quiet. Wu Zetian was still on the throne, still powerful. But something had changed. Not outside, inside. The voices around her had faded. Some were removed, some disappeared. Some simply stopped speaking. And in that silence, something else began to grow. Distance. There's a moment in every life when power can no longer protect you from time. I think she felt that. A ruler who once controlled everything, now surrounded by fewer and fewer people she could trust. The system she built still worked, but it no longer felt the same. And here's what history doesn't always show you. The end is rarely loud. There was no dramatic fall, no final battle, no clear moment where everything broke. Just a slow shift. Power moving away. Decisions being made without her. Until one day, she was no longer the center of it all. And then, she was gone. Quietly. I've always found that part unsettling. Because after everything, there's no final explanation. No confession, no defense, no moment where she tells us who she really was. Just silence. And that silence gets filled. By historians, by stories, by assumptions. Some say she was a tyrant. Others say she was a visionary. But none of them were inside her mind. None of them stood where she stood. So what do we actually have? Fragments. Pieces of a life told by people who never fully understood it. And maybe that's the truth we don't like. That we want history to feel complete. Clear. Decided. But sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the most important parts are the ones we never get to hear. So when we look back at her, what are we really seeing? A woman defined by her actions, or a silence shaped by others? I don't think we'll ever know for sure. But maybe that's the point. Because in the end, what history leaves out can be just as powerful as what it leaves behind. She is gone, and all that's left is the question. Wu Zetian no longer speaks. No final words, no clean ending. Just a life and the stories we build around it. Some people hear her name and see a monster. A woman who crossed every line, who took what she wanted, who left damage behind. And I understand that. Because power like hers doesn't come gently. It pushes, it takes, it changes people. But others look at the same life and see something else. A woman born into a world that had no place for her. A system designed to keep her small. And a mind that refused to stay there. that matters. At least, I think it does. Because there's a difference between breaking rules and breaking rules that were never meant to be fair. So where does that leave us? Standing between two versions of the same person. One built on fear, one built on possibility. And neither feels complete. There's a story I keep coming back to. Not about her, about anyone. A person rises higher than they're supposed to. They survive longer than expected. They change things others depend on. And in the end, people don't just judge what they did. They judge what it cost them. I think that's what we're really doing here. We're not just asking, was she good or bad? We're asking, how much power is too much for anyone? And maybe more importantly, if you had her position, her risks, her enemies, would you have done it differently? Or would you have done exactly the same and hoped someone kinder would write your story? That's the part that stays with me. Not the accusations, not the praise, but the distance between them. Because somewhere in that space is a real person. Complicated, uncomfortable, impossible to simplify. So maybe she wasn't just a monster. And maybe she wasn't just a visionary either. Maybe she was something harder to accept. The price of power, when no one expects you to survive it,